Welcome to Chapter 34, the evolution of chordates. This is a quick review of the chapter. Since we had all this time off lately, I thought we'd do a quick review. Remember that chordates are a branch of the animals. We share a common ancestor with echinoderms. So we have echinoderms, we have chordates, but chordates have lots of derived traits that make them different from echinoderms. And if we look at the basic chordate body plan, first of all, we all have a nerve cord, a dorsal hollow nerve cord. I'm just going to call it a nerve cord for now. Part of our nervous system we have, and that's on the dorsal side, hence the dorsal part of dorsal hollow nerve cord. And below that we have another structure made of cartilage. This is called the notochord. We also have gill slits or pharyngeal slits. And these, the slits and the notochord are lost in some vertebrates like ourselves. Not all vertebrates. The pharyngeal slits may become part of the gills in the fish, for example, but part of our throat. So we don't have gills. We don't have these openings anymore. Our notochord is replaced with our vertebrae. Now, the digestive tract comes through and will exit here at the anus, which is not a derived trait of chordates. Obviously, lots of animals have that part, but we do have this, which is the post-anal tail. Even humans have this in the form of a tailbone. This is a tail that would stick out past the anus. So these traits together make up a chordate, and this includes the lanceolate and the tunicates, which is the group most similar to the rest of the chordates, the vertebrates, and other chordates. So the tunicates are the most similar to us in terms of the early chordates. This is the Chordata is their proper name, and remember they have a embryo or a larva that looks much like this example up above, but the adult form is highly derived and does not look like that. So in tunicates, the larval form looks more like the rest of us, so we could say that the typical chordate form is probably the result of paedomorphosis, that change in body plan to a more juvenile form. So the tunicates being the most like everybody else higher up on the tree. Okay, now the next step of evolution then is going to be the evolution of a definite head. And so if we have a cladogram here, a nice pink cladogram here, we're going to have groups like the tunicates. So this is going to be a clade that includes all chordates. I'm not going to fit them all on here, but just to give us a start here, we're going to have the evolution of the craniates, which is the clade that includes everything with a definite head, and that includes the hagfish. Okay. The next thing that's going to evolve then is going to be vertebrae. And vertebrates all have vertebrae, and the first group that's going to split off now are the jawless fish. Jawless fish. Okay. Like the lampreys, those fish that act like parasites on the sides of other organisms in the water, like jawed fish. Okay, now we're going to have the evolution of jaws and teeth. Jaws, and this clade now is called the gnathostomes. We saw that in lecture. And the first group that splits off are sharks and rays. And sharks and rays I'm just going to say sharks, but rays are included here too, have a skeleton made of cartilage. So they are cartilaginous. But they have bony teeth and jaws. Okay, now the next thing that's going to evolve is going to be a bony skeleton. And the group that's going to be derived off of this here is going to be, I'm going to write it up, I'll write it down here actually. This is going to be the osteichthyes, which means bony fish. This includes things like bass, bluegill, and other organisms. Let's just write it down here. Osteichthyes. And that's the bony fish. And there's two types of bony fish. We could draw them like this, or maybe one down here. But let's scroll down. Let me just finish this up here. We're going to have those, and we're also then going to have tetrapods at the end of the tree. Okay. In the osteichthyes, we have two types. We have the ray-finned and the lobe-finned. Okay. Now, this group of the osteichthyes, especially the ray-finned fish, are the most diverse group of vertebrates on Earth. So most diverse, and they have, and all of these groups both have swim bladders, which allows them to stay buoyant in the water, and swim bladders probably evolved into lungs in some groups. So the ray-finned fish, most diverse, they have fins that have just thin bones in them. If you've ever eaten fish, you know what fish bones are like. They're just thin bones. They're not meant to support their weight or anything like that. They're just very thin. Whereas lobe-finned fish will have much more complicated bones. I'm not going to actually draw them in any accurate way, but they have much more robust bones that are homologous to those in our wrist and our feet. Now, lobe-finned fish, only a couple species exist, including the coelacanth, which was thought to be extinct for millions of years until some were found off the coast of Madagascar, and these gave rise to the tetrapods. This group, like I said, their bones are homologous to our bones. They gave rise to the tetrapods, starting with organisms like Tiktaalik. If you remember Tiktaalik from one of our very first lectures, Tiktaalik is pretty cool. It has features that are both fish-like and tetrapod-like, so they often call it a fishapod. It's a hybrid between the two. It's a transitional species, if you will. Tiktaalik has fish-like characters. Let me just draw a really crude sketch here. They have a head and a little bit of a neck, and then a long body and a tail, and then they have little flippery feet. And they would sit in the water probably like this. They have eyes on the top of their head, so if you want to think of them as tetrapods, okay, forgive the intrusion there. I had company in the office for a moment. Okay, so Tiktaalik had a flat head, unlike fish, and more like tetrapods. They had eyes way up here on the top of their head, but they also had scales like a fish. So they had scales, which is not very tetrapod-like. They did have bones in their fins that are tetrapod-like, but they still had fins, like a fish. But they did also have a neck, which is very tetrapod-like. You don't really use a neck in the ocean that much. You swim your body left and right rather than turn your head left and right. So pretty interesting organism, Tiktaalik. And Tiktaalik, or organisms like it, gave rise to the amphibians. which is a class of chordates. Let me shut off that layer. Okay, so amphibians are a tetrapod, and tetrapods have 4 limbs. And they have a neck. We saw the neck in Tiktaalik. And they have ears that allow them to hear sounds in the air. So, unlike organisms in the ocean that pick up vibrations in water, we hear sounds carried by the air. Okay. Now let's look at amphibians, class Amphibia. They are better adapted to life on land than fish, obviously. They're not fully adapted to life on land. So they do have legs, they have lungs, but their lungs are not as efficient as other terrestrial tetrapods. They're just sort of a bag that doesn't have much surface area. Air comes in, CO2 comes out, so oxygen in, CO2 out. But they also do a lot of their respiration through cutaneous respiration, which means they have skin and oxygen comes in, CO2 comes out, and therefore this has to be moist. So they can't really get away from water very far or they'll dry out and suffocate. They also have eyelids, which is kind of cool. Fish don't really do that. They don't need to blink because their eyes are always wet, surrounded by water. And another thing that amphibians have is a partially divided heart. So they have a 3-chambered heart. But there's a lot of mixing of oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood in this heart. So you're going to have a chamber here, a chamber here, your ventricle here, you know, and but these walls aren't actually really there, allowing some of this blood to mix. Oops, I clicked the wrong button. Allowing some of this blood here, there we go. Oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor blood might mix quite a bit because there's not really a wall separating the right and left sides of the heart. So the ventricle will have a mixture of both types of blood. So you never have really highly oxygenated blood. Now, amphibians have a pretty strong bony skeleton. If you've ever eaten frog legs, you know this. That allows them to fight gravity, allows them to walk on land. This 3-chambered heart allows them to pump oxygen much more efficiently than the 2-chambered heart of a fish. So this is not great, but it's better than this. So they are pretty good at living on land. But they're also tied into water. They need to be moist, and their eggs need to be laid in water. So that's a big problem. You can't get away from water too far if you have to lay your eggs in water. So the next evolutionary adaptation then is going to be the reptiles. Reptiles are going to have a thick outer skin, so they're going to have scales. So the class Reptilia, reptiles, they're going to have scales, of course. Prevent dehydration, basically, is what's going on there. Their skin prevents dehydration. They are going to have internal fertilization. Fish, most of the fish and the amphibians have external fertilization, which does not work well on land at all. And thick skin, like I said. Their eggs have a shell on them, a leathery shell that prevents dehydration, and more importantly, they've evolved the amnion, which is a membrane in the egg that basically prevents water loss, so you can lay eggs on land instead of in the water. So if you have an egg and you have your little embryo inside, okay, so there's your embryo, and around that embryo will be the amnion. And then there'll be other membranes out here as well. We're just going to focus on the amnion. They're all important, but we'll focus just on the one. That allows the egg to be laid on land. So we can call all of these things extra embryonic membrane. And that allows the eggs to be laid on land. And of course there is a leathery shell. Not hard like a chicken egg, but leathery. Okay. Reptiles also have a slightly more advanced circulatory system where less of that blood is mixing in the heart, but still mostly three-chambered, except for the crocodiles and the birds. So let's just look at birds, and remember, birds are modified dinosaurs. Pretty sweet. Okay, how? Well, they don't have teeth. So I guess that's good, because an ostrich with teeth would be extra scary. Their scales are modified into feathers. So feathers are homologous with scales. They're endothermic. So they have a fast metabolism, allows them to run around on land, do lots of things on land, fly, stay warm, etc., etc. And their hearts have 4 chambers. This is important for endothermic animals because you have to have lots of blood flow to stay endothermic. So high metabolism. This is not possible if you have mixing of blood and a 3-chambered heart. Then we get to the last class of animals. I haven't been featuring this much, but the class, you know, the classification here, but this is the class Mammalia. So we've been looking at different classes of chordates, and we evolved from synapsid reptilian-like ancestors. And the synapsid, well, you're all familiar with at least one of them. Let me do a crude drawing here. Here's the head, here's the long body. Okay, I did not really draw a head. Oh well. Okay, legs. And this is those ancient dinosaur-like creatures that had the big sails on their back. We're related to them. They're not dinosaurs, they're synapsid reptiles or reptilian-like animals, and they had the big sail on their back. But mammals, actual mammals, show up in the Jurassic, and they become dominant after the dinosaurs go extinct. So what makes a mammal a mammal? Well, I bet you can come up with this on your own. Of course, we have hair. We're endothermic. We make our own body heat. Also, we have mammary glands. So we can nurse our young. That's a very good adaptation to life on land. So let's just talk about the major groups of mammals real quick. First of all, there are the monotremes. I'm going to switch colors here. Keep this straight. So the monotremes, and they lay eggs. And this includes the duck-billed platypus and echidna. And they have milk glands, but they don't have nipples. The milk seeps out of the abdomen, and the young lick it out of the fur. Pretty cool group. You can read about more of these in your book. The next group are the marsupials. And marsupials are born very, very small, very immature compared to other mammals. So they're immature at birth, and they mature in a pouch. They have to actually crawl to the pouch and in the pouch is where the nipples are, and they nurse in there. So if they don't make it, they die. The mothers generally don't help them into the pouch, so if they don't make it, they're dead. So quite a selective disadvantage here. Once the next group of mammals evolved, they mostly outcompeted the marsupials. Now the marsupials evolved. They were found all over the earth at about the time Australia broke away and drifted off. Australia did not really have anything but marsupials and some monotremes, whereas in the rest of the world, placental mammals outcompeted the marsupials, and we're only left with a few. Like in North America, we have possum. That's our native marsupial. So the next group are the placental mammals, and the proper name for them are the eutherians. And we have live birth, and so do marsupials, but our young develop in the womb until maturity, until they're pretty, a lot more mature than marsupials. And the young, the developing embryos are fed or nourished by the placenta. Okay, let me make a new layer here. Okay. Alright. So then we get to primates. Let's just mention primates for a little bit. What makes humans? We're a type of placental mammal. We could talk about all kinds of different mammals, but let's just focus on ourselves. What makes us human? I mean, there are other primates. If you look at a cladogram, of relatedness. Oops, that a little crooked there. But you have gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. Humans did not evolve from chimpanzees. They share a common ancestor with chimpanzees. We're very, very similar to them. In fact, we are 99% of our genes are similar to chimpanzees. We only really mainly differ in 19 regulatory genes. The genes that control development and things like that. But this results in lots of phenotypic changes. First of all, bipedalism. The ability to walk on two legs, very important. We have larger brains. And we think that gives us the ability to have symbolic thought, which you don't see, at least not in as much detail as you would in other animals. So we see art and music and things like this. We also have smaller jaws. So our bones and our muscles that control our jaws are smaller in these organisms. Now if we look, they're smaller in us than they are in the other primates. If we look at our fossil record, we would know that there would be a whole lot of relatives down here that are now unfortunately extinct. There are 20 known fossil hominins, human-like fossil ancestors. They first show up in Africa 6 to 7 million years ago, and they first started off having small brains. So we had small brains, but we were bipedal early on. So bipedal was common, but our brains didn't get big until many species after the evolution of the first hominin. And as we see, we get some very humanoid-like organisms that were related to us. One very famous one is in our same genus, Homo habilis, which means handyman. This was a tool maker somewhere around 1.6 million years ago. Probably it could very well be a direct ancestor of ours. We also know of a cousin, Homo neanderthalis, Neanderthals, which Homo sapiens may have actually bred with to create cousins, or to create hybrids, which led to Europeans and Asians especially have a lot more Homo sapien blood in them than other groups. Now, if we look at just our species, Homo sapiens. Remember, although it didn't make it clear here, Homo is capitalized, sapiens should be lowercase, and we underline it because it's a scientific name. Excuse me. We show up around 195,000 years ago. And of course, we evolve in Africa. And after we left Africa, some of us may have bred with Neanderthals, where those that remained in Africa did not interbreed with Neanderthals. So we see a lot more Neanderthal genes in those that left Africa early on. In fact, most Europeans have around 2.6% of their genes are Neanderthal in origin. I actually had a DNA test done. I'm about 2.3 or 2.4%, so I'm a little lower than average, I guess. But, oh well, we can't all be cavemen. So, that's where we come from a group of primates that evolved in Africa, evolved bipedalism, and eventually large brains. We had lots of relatives that if they were still around, we would have all these organisms that were a lot more human-like than chimpanzee-like, but they have all gone extinct, and we are the remaining species alive today. So I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you in class.